17 chapters of Flow. A very special welcome and appreciation to my esteemed speakers today, Dr. Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, Executive Chairman of Biocon, Suchitra Ella, Joint MD of Bharat Biotech, and with Mahima Datla, MD of Biological E. Ladies, thank you for taking your time from all your multitasking schedule to find time to be a part of my first session as President-elect Flow 2020-2021. I might add here that the reason why we have two presidents sitting here to watch your show, President Harjinder and incoming President Jahnavi, is because we find ourselves in these pandemic times. However, we are taking the opportunity of getting together in this virtual conference for all our members to listen to the three powerful women in India's biotechnological industry today. As you know, Flow is an organization since 1983 working towards women upliftment and empowerment. We have tried to evolve and be responsive to the times as well. And despite the pandemic, we have continued our work and we now meet virtually. In fact, in a first for Flow, we not only have two presidents in the interim, but we have 17 chapters which have changed guard in a virtual mode. So with this, coming back to the coronavirus, the pandemic which we find ourselves in, we thought we need to know from you, how is it that we are coping? How is it that the world is going to cope? We know the World Health Organization has announced that coronavirus may finally be just one of the diseases that lives on, like the influenza or HIV. However, we can't bring our lives to a halt because of this. And we understand that while the world is looking for a cure, the vaccine, we will try to continue our daily lives. And we are so proud to know that there are these three women from India, from the biotechnological companies, who are trying to find that vaccine for us, that cure for us. And that while the world is scrambling to find the safe and effective vaccine, India and Indians are leading the race. In spite of all the limitations and the challenges of the developing country, it is India that the world is looking to. And that makes us so proud. So in this, we would like to hear more about this journey. That is why we are all here together to listen to what is going to be the way out and the way forward for all of us. So may I introduce my first of the panel, Ms. Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, Executive Director of Biocon Limited, Asia's leading biopharmaceutical enterprise. Ms. Shaw is a leading entrepreneur, influencer for millions globally, and a proud recipient of the Padma Shri and the Padma Bhushan. And a small memento from the side of Flow. May I ask our IT team to show Ms. Shaw our memento, which we will have courier to you later. IT, the memento, please.
Thank you.
Next, Ms. Suchitra Ella, Joint Managing Director of Bharat Biotech, which she co-founded with Dr. Ella in 1996. With experience in customer operations, finance and marketing and business development, Ms. Ella is a strong pillar of support and guidance at Bharat Biotech, overseeing a wide range of operations in the country. Ms. Ella, may I present a small memento from Flow. Thank you. IT, the memento, please. And then next we have Ms. Mahima Datla, Managing Director of Biological E.
A leading
biopharmaceutical company based in Hyderabad. This company specializes in the area of low-cost vaccine production. Ladies, our session today will be moderated by the very well-known face on television, Ms. Priya Sehgal, Senior Journalist, NewsX.
Thank you.
Recently, the ICMR, the Indian Council of Medical Research, announced a tie-up with Biotech International Limited to develop a fully indigenous vaccine using the virus strain isolated at the National Institute of Virology, Pune. Biocon, one of the top biopharmaceutical companies in the country, is working on the next generation biotech cure for the COVID-19 pandemic. And Biological E is working on finding another option for the COVID-19 vaccine. All these are so encouraging to listen to and learn about. And here we are today to learn from you how we are going forward and to tell you once again that India is so proud of you. Thank you so much for joining us, and a huge round of applause for our esteemed group. May I now hand over the mic to Priya, and we look forward to listening to all of you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janvi, and first of all, congratulations on both on being the president-elect and also for putting together such a wonderful panel for coming up with this idea. It really is the need of the hour, and I'm very pleased to be part of this. And also a special word of thanks for an old friend, Kamini Saraf, who also conceptualized this and brought me into it. And welcome to my panel. I mean, I'm very glad to be hearing this conversation because as I understand it, correctly if I'm wrong because I'm talking to the experts, but the main focus for us really is to battle this virus. Three forms: it's cures, vaccines, and testing. I think in terms of testing, we kind of have got that sorted out, except whether our tests are indigenous, whether they should be more freely available. Those are the issues before us. But cures and vaccinations, I think that is the biggest problem that we are facing. We need, I think, by when can the first vaccination or the cure be found? We need about 7 billion vaccines all over the world. So whoever finds it, whoever discovers it, will need India's help in producing it, because we've garnered about 15% of the global market. We do play a role in. We are known for our low cost mass production and good quality production. So India will play a role. But I want to begin with you, Dr. Shaw. You've been talking about a plasma-based antibody, from what I've been hearing. First, how soon can we come up with the vaccine? Donald Trump, I mean, the first time I want to believe Donald Trump is he's saying we should have a vaccine by the end of the year. I mean, is that timeline at all credible? And where do you see us going? Where do we stand right now? Dr. Shaw.
Thank you, Priya, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting and important panel discussion, because I must say that this is a very important platform for all three of us to talk about science and to tell all of you that science is so important for you to encourage your daughters to pursue as an important subject for making them future ready. So let me start by answering your questions. First and foremost, I think, like you rightly said, this pandemic has just taken us by storm. It is something that is unprecedented, and it is something that has brought in so much fear for the first time into global society. So just like what happened to the world when AIDS struck us, I think the coronavirus, the COVID-19, has also had a similar effect, except on a much bigger scale. Here, it's basically saying nobody is safe. And it's also saying that there is no guarantee who will live and who will succumb to this deadly virus. Now, having said that, I think as the virus has, grown in terms of the number of days we've had to deal with it, I think we've understood what the disease is about, how the disease is being spread. And I think in India, I must say, thanks to a lot of the preemptive measures we took, we are in a much better place today than we could have been if we didn't do anything about it. As you know, the world is absolutely waiting for a vaccine. But until we get the vaccine, we need to test and we need to treat.
Yes.
Now, I think when you look at what is happening in India, I have recently been asked by the Department of Biotechnology to lead an initiative called NBRIC, which is the National Biomedical Resource Indigenization Consortium. And why did we have to do this? It's because when the outbreak happened, we realized that we were totally dependent on imported test kits. And we realized that at the same time, these test kits were being rationed to India because of the huge surge in cases in Europe and USA. And that was not a good place to be in. So very quickly, we actually rallied forth, and the Indian biotech sector, I must say, worked very, very fast and came out with a indigenous test kit. And since then, many, many test kits have come out. And I'm also happy to say that the first test kit...
What are the numbers that we're looking at? Because even now we are told that everybody cannot be tested. When will we come to that position?
I don't think everybody needs to be tested. I think there are various ways of testing people. So let me talk about that. But what I did want to say for all the ladies here is that even the first indigenous test kit was actually developed by a woman scientist. She's the one who led the team, Meenal Bhosle from My Labs. So I think that is also something we should be proud of as women. But beyond that, I also want to say that after the My Labs kit came out, many other indigenous kits have also been developed. And today, I'm glad to say that, and proud to say that we can actually test using RT-PCR kits over 200,000 tests per day. So I think that is a big, big improvement from the 10,000 tests per day level that we were at in early March to the 200,000 plus tests that we can do today. And I can tell you, in a very short time, we'll be able to test provide 1 million tests per day with indigenously made kits. Now, the point was that even these indigenously made kits had to import a lot of their components. So NBRIC is actually given the task of saying, how do we indigenize every single component of these kits so that we become absolutely self-reliant? And the discovery we've made is that we can do it. There are many, many biotech companies. There are many companies who can give us all the various components of these RT-PCR kits. Now, let's come to your next question of, can everybody be tested?
Let me bring on the others and then
I just finish the test kit bit, because I think it's important for people to know that there are also serological kits, which are antibody tests. And these are also kits that are being developed in India. And I think beyond that, there is treatment. And of course, there's vaccines. And you've got two wonderful women on this panel, both in the vaccine industry, and both who can actually tell you about how India can be self-sufficient even in vaccines when it comes out.
Okay, thank you for that. I was in fact going to bring in Dr. Ella, because you've been working on COVID flu, Coro flu. And so can you tell us exactly where we are with that and where we are headed actually in terms of a vaccination?
Hi. Our vaccine development approach has been, I would say, multifold. The first one that, of course, was announced was the collaboration with the University of Wisconsin and FluGen, which have already started, they had already started working on a flu vaccine, which has also undergone human trials in the United States. But then when COVID struck us, and as Kiran earlier pointed out, and she has gone through the, the introduction of COVID, so I'm not going to get into that. So all of us in the industry, the entire pharma, biotech, life sciences, all put together, were probably taken by shock, and it hit us from the back. When we realized that we had this discussions on with FluGen and with the University of Wisconsin, since they were already experts in that specific area of vaccine development for influenza. We also then, deliberated and brought together this aspect of introducing the COVID-19 spike protein into the platform technology that was already there available. So now that is presently undergoing the animal trials as we speak. And the animal data is very important because someone could ask me very quickly as to why is it taking so long? And that's everybody's question too. But all of us know, Kiran, Mahima, and myself, we all know that, I keep telling people for common understanding, I use this phrase, not in any other sense. Unfortunately, we work in biology and in biological systems around us. And I don't think we have mathematical formulas to put together and plug in and then, give, data that can just come out in equations or formulas, which are mathematically or, in the engineering sense. Since it's biology, everything is an experiment. There are protocols. There's data that needs to be submitted. There's safety more than anything because a vaccine is a preventive intervention for any of the infectious diseases or infections that we find around us. So giving something to a healthy child, baby, or an adult, and causing any kind of harm or what you call a kind of an adverse effect, or something that would be fatal even to their life, is not something that anybody would take it very kindly. So animal testing has become so important so that we as vaccine manufacturers could go and first establish that the safety of that particular vaccine is proven in the animals as per the protocols.
You have a timeline. I know you're saying it's not maths, but we all want
yes, timelines and no timelines will go always hand in glove with us. Again, I can infer examples from the past. Vaccine developments can take 15 to 20 long years. I have an experience ourselves in the company where we had a development for rotavirus, which took us 15 years on our side, and prior to which it was there, the upstream of it was happening much beyond that. Coming to a situation like this, the pandemic that we are in, and an emergency situation where the whole world is looking forward, we could maybe crunch those numbers to under 24 months, 18 months, or 12 months. The sooner, the better for all of us. And that's the goal and the objective that we have at Bharat as well.
Thank you. Sooner the better. I really
yeah.
Mahima, could you tell us also a bit about what you are working on? You did work on the typhoid vaccine, so you've been working on infectious diseases. And to quote an interview of Kiran, Dr. Shaw, isn't it time now that we focus more on infectious diseases rather than non-infectious diseases?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you'll definitely find a supporter in me about infectious diseases, because that's what we've been doing for, close to 60 years now in the company. We've always made vaccines and they were always for infectious diseases. So you'll find a huge supporter in me. When it comes to the types of vaccines we've been working on for COVID, there's a couple of approaches that we've looked at. One is really the protein approach, because we feel like there's an infrastructure match, and the protein approach might enable us to get into being able to scale the vaccine pretty rapidly. But like any manufacturer, nobody's making bets on just one approach, because we don't know the science behind this virus enough to say, well, that's the approach and this is what we want to go after. So we're looking at least 3 different approaches right now. Protein derivatives, adenovirus vector-based vaccines, and so on. But to your original point, I don't want to sound like a pessimist, but I would be really, really surprised if we saw a vaccine before the end of the year. Yeah, as much as I would like that to be the case, I don't think it will be the case.
So, Dr. Shah, if there is no vaccine in sight, let's talk about the cures. There is remdesivir. I don't know, the hydrochloric experiment. I don't think really took off. But how far has remdesivir gone? And in terms of cures, what are we looking at? Vaccines will come maybe a little later.
So I want to just add to what both Suchitra and Mahima said. And I just want to tell you that, even if you see a vaccine being approved before the end of the year, which we are all keeping our fingers crossed about, these vaccines are going to be basically emergency use approvals. They're going to be conditional approvals, because for vaccine development, as my other co-panelists will tell you, it is about first getting an immune response, finding what is the right dose for that immune response. That's what happens in phase 1. And then you need to basically evaluate the efficacy and how long the response endures. So the immune response has to endure for some time. So does it endure for a few months, for a few weeks? I mean, these are the kind of questions you have to answer. And that is why it takes so long to develop a vaccine. And so even if you see some good extrapolated data that says that, yes, this vaccine is working, it is giving a good response. Yes, the antibody levels are showing that there is a good response and so on and so forth. I think we should also be realistic that even if the vaccine is approved by the end of the year, it will be used for vulnerable people in the population. It will probably be used first for healthcare workers. And then by the time the larger population can even, use it, it's going to be a couple of years. So until then, you do need treatments. It was, and why do we need treatments? Because people today are very fearful. If you have a treatment that basically says, by the way, you will not die if you get COVID-19. If that is the, security and comfort you give people, then people will stop being fearful of getting the coronavirus.
Stigma has to go away, you're right.
And for that, your question about remdesivir, right now, I think we are clutching at every straw possible. So any little data that's coming out which seems to indicate that it has some efficacy is being talked about in a big way. I, for one, believe we really don't have compelling and convincing data that anything is actually the miracle cure. Okay. For instance, we first started with HCQ. HCQ also showed that it has very limited effect or efficacy on any patients. That is hydrochloroquine. Then we come to remdesivir. Remdesivir, as of now, only tells you that the hospital stay has been shortened by 3 days of people who actually responded to the drug. But there was no difference in the death rates or the mortality rates, or hardly statistically significant. So that is not a comforting set of data points. And that is why, remdesivir has also not been thought of as a miracle cure. Now they're talking about other such cocktails of antiretrovirals, and that trial is also ongoing. We ourselves are repurposing one of our very interesting antibodies, which is a immunomodulating antibody, which is very good for both anti-inflammation and downregulation of what we call cytokines. The first few patients who have got this drug are doing very well. So I'm just hoping that this drug has the right kind of effect, but it's very early days. There are many products under trial, but we need to see.
Suchitra, you want to come in on the cures? What have you heard? You must have picked up on the market. And Kiran spoke about a vulnerable age. So are we hearing it? Have we got it right that the older are more vulnerable? Above, people are saying there may be rules saying above 80 shouldn't travel. So God help, all our grandparents. But are those kind of assumptions correct?
Is that to me or to Kiran?
Suchitra, with you.
Well, see, again, our way of working at our processes and the technologies and the therapy lines and the testing or the protocols and the guidelines, everything is very, very, I would say, internationally guided. It's a guided process. It's a highly regulated process again. So many a times we do not pick up hearsay, and unless we have, clinical data to prove it or to be assertive about it, we just cannot go about even assuming things. And like Kiran said earlier, we are all trying to, attack or go behind the lowest hanging fruit, if I could say that. That is what is all the efforts that is going around in the pharma and in the biotech sector as well. Yes, the populations that are going to be vulnerable are definitely those of them who are going to be 60 plus or 65 plus. It's just, again, not by this particular virus alone, because every year we come across so many viruses, and influenza is a classic example in many parts of the world. And the US alone has cases where we have documented cases. I mean, this is all evidence again. It is not hearsay or market information, that 100,000 patients infected with influenza die each year in the United States alone. So this kind of data is available to us, and we know that worldwide what kind of scenario and the numbers play up to. And we know who are the vulnerable populations of the world, whether it is the infants, the children, or the adult, the 60, 70 plus. But again, I would not say that because influenza comes every year, we're going to duck under the table and we are not going to carry out our activities and our work and go on with our lives. There are vaccines for influenza too each year. The strain changes, and according to which then the current vaccine is then brought out based on the mutation that has happened and the change that has taken place in the virus itself. So the vaccine that is developed for that year is different from the vaccine that was developed the previous year. So that having said, the population that is vulnerable are the aged, because, or even maybe not, sometimes not so aged, but maybe even middle-aged, due to the other comorbidities that may be present, unfortunately, in that particular person. So if there are other illnesses that the patient who has been tested positive is already pre-existing in them, then they are not only, taking medication and dealing with those drugs and therapies that they would have to take for their other disease burden. But in addition to that, then the COVID virus, the infection itself becoming very strong in terms of coming and making it difficult on the respiratory system because of the way it intercepts into the respiratory tract and the mechanism and all that. So it kind of pulls the entire, functions or the handling of the other organs or the other comorbidities that is present in that particular patient. So I think we also see positive cases of people coming out of the hospital. So I think that needs to also be told to people that we can fight it out, provided we can take care of some of the precautions, but at the same time not be overly scared and panicked and pushed to the wall and keep saying that, oh my God, this is doomsday and we're all going to die. So I don't want to go out with that kind of a message out, but I certainly believe that the world is together in this. It's just not a company or a country, but I think the entire world is coming together. And I'm sure, and we are all talking together, not about, this time around, it's not IPR and patent and all that. We know how important it is in our industry. Kiran knows that, Mahima knows that, all of us know it. But I think all of us have cut across those barriers, and we are coming together for public health and for public good, and rise above all the barriers that are around us to bring forth something that would be remedial and helpful for human life.
Good to see women at the forefront of the fight, such as the one we have on our panel. Maima, both Kiran and Suchitra have spoken about the psyche of it. Let's not be scared. Let's not create a stigma. Let's be, careful. And at least, I think we're all moving towards an exit from lockdown, really, preparing everybody for it. How confident are you of an exit strategy? Are we ready to exit now? Do we have enough tests in place? Are we, okay, even without a cure to move out?
Well, that's a very difficult question because, I keep saying we're sort of in a lose-lose situation. These lockdowns are not sustainable. At the same time, any kind of, really rapid exit strategy is also not going to be sustainable because the last thing you want to see is a new wave of cases coming up. What's also scary is that you have to remember 80% of the people are asymptomatic. So we could all be carriers without showing any symptoms whatsoever, no cough, no cold, which makes the elderly that much more vulnerable. So even without a lockdown, and even if we have a kind of light exit, as you call it, it's really important to be responsible because you're not testing, so you don't know really if you're carrying the infection around. So I think it's really important to bear that in mind.
Okay, Kiran, I have two questions for you. One, of course, is the exit question. I've heard you talk a lot about that. It's time to move out and move on. And secondly, you began by talking about testing. So how accurate are the antibody tests? The FDA has cautioned against them. So how, you've been, campaigning for them. You've been talking about them. So a bit about the antibody test. And second, how confident are you that it's now time to exit the lockdown? Kiran.
Yeah, so I think the antibody tests are very tricky. They're not simple. And I personally believe that yesterday you must have read about the Abbott antibody test not working quite as well as it should. There's a high level of, false positives, which is not good when you're trying to test a large population. And I think here it's because it depends what part of the viral protein that you use to develop the antibody test. Roche and Abbott have actually chosen the N protein, as they call it, and many of us in this country are using the S1 and S2 proteins, which are far more specific for a readout than the N protein. And I think this is where I think the specificity counts, and you have to be very, very highly specific. You cannot have cross-reactivity with other viruses. So it's quite a difficult task to develop these antibody tests. But having said that, I think India is capable of producing a very good, highly specific antibody test, which is absolutely a must for a country like India. Right now, we are developing ELISA-based tests, which is enzyme-linked immunoassays. And then we are also doing point-of-care tests, where you actually translate that ELISA test to a strip, like a pregnancy kit test, So these tests, these strips are going to be very important because they can actually tell you whether you're positive or negative to the in terms of the antibodies. And I think then what you have to do is you have to use these tests at a large scale. And when you have a positive, it is often very necessary to corroborate it with a RT-PCR test. And what it basically tells you is, are you in the recovery phase or are you in the recovered phase? That is what it basically tells you when you corroborate it with an RT-PCR test. There is also this whole approach to pool testing, which means you can pool the number of people together so that you can do mass screening and mass testing. So I think this is going to be very important because you must test more to make sure that you have safe zones and a large number of people are negative so that you get more and more comfortable. Now, to go back to your question about the exit strategy, I think the exit strategy is extremely important and it should be data-led. For instance, I will share with you that I'm working with a group of very, very smart people in Bangalore, from Intel, from Microsoft, and many other IT companies. And we are trying to build an AI-based platform where we are going to look at all kinds of data from Arogya Setu, for instance, data from your telephones, for instance, data from various other means that you can actually get in an anonymized way.
And you violate the privacy concerns while getting this data.
Yeah, but I think you are making too much of privacy concerns. If you download an app, you're basically saying, please use my data to fight COVID. What is this nonsense about privacy? Don't you want to fight COVID, or are you going to be bothered about your privacy? This data is important to fight COVID. This data is going to be important to have an exit policy. So I think we should stop being overhyped about data security, because these are all anonymized data points. And what I'm trying to tell you is, without that data, you will never be safe. So you decide, you want to be safe or you don't want to be safe. But I think this data is extremely important, because imagine, contact tracing is about safety. It is not about privacy. Okay. Secondly, when you're looking at a Google app which tells you about which road is got too much traffic or no traffic, is that a privacy issue? No, it is basically taking data from your phones. And if the same algorithm can be used to know where there are clusters or gatherings of people, or where there's too much of congregation, that should alert you that this is not what is good, right? And that can alert the police and say, look, go here, there's a congregation of people here. Or for that matter, you can start looking at safe zones. If you, on top of the Arogya Setu app, if you start putting data of like what Suchitra talked about, she talked about comorbidities. If you have data of comorbidities, how many diabetics there are, how many hypertensives there are, how many cancer patients there are in a particular zone, you can add to the risk profile. And when you start looking at unlocking, you say, hey, this area is very safe, very low risk. There is no positive cases within a 5-kilometer radius. So let's open up this. This zone can actually even have restaurants open. This zone cannot have restaurants open because there are so many cases. You need that kind of data. So what we are doing is we are trying to build this platform where governments can actually start understanding how to exit. And I think this is extremely important. And this, if we can pull it off in Bangalore and Karnataka, I think this can be shared with the world, because that's what the world really needs to do. You can see in the US, or any government for that matter in our state, is worried about what will happen when they unlock. And we need to make sure that the data is feeding back into the system that says you're still safe, you're still safe. Now you better watch it, because we've seen something which is not good. And as soon as you address it, again, you're safe. That's the kind of lifting we'll have to do for at least the next 6 to 9 months. And once we start feeling much safer about how things are moving, and once we have treatments, I can tell you that today we have understood what the disease does much more than when it started. Today we know that it is not just about using a ventilator, because it has got nothing to do with your lungs not being able to breathe. What is happening is that your lungs are getting inflamed and there are blood clots taking place. So today there are even therapies saying, let's give them low molecular weight heparin to prevent those blood clots. So the way they are managing this disease is much better than what it was when it started. And I, for one, feel very optimistic that in the next few months, you are going to get a treatment regimen that doesn't cause people to die. I think that's your first big success step. And then, of course, finally comes the vaccine. But until the vaccine arrives, you must have a proper treatment that saves lives. You don't want people to die. As long as people don't die, just like Suchitra very rightly said, look, hundreds of thousands of people die from influenza every year, and we don't panic. Because the average person will not die. Today, what is happening is that even an average person is dying. And that average person can be young, maybe with diabetes or hypertension. Yes, most of the patients have got hypertension and diabetes or cancer or some other disease. But I think they need not die. So I think that's what we need to get to.
Get more reassurance. Shritha, I want to take off from Kiran's point about, the symptoms of the disease. And I want to, because there are a lot of, we thought it affects the lungs. Now, now the smokers are going around saying that, if you smoke, you're saved. So if you can just tell us a bit about, when the person recovers, does he or she recover totally, or is there a relapse? And also, what are the after effects of the disease? Do you say suffer a kidney damage, or you are more prone to blood clots? What does this disease do to you?
Priya, first of all, I'm not a doctor I'm not an MBBS doctor, so I don't want to predict that this is the symptom, or this is going to be the follow-up, or that's going to be another thing to be dealing with. But I think as and when we come out of any kind of a severe hospitalization for any disease parameter that we look at in human life and in the society around us, we all have to take precautions which are prescribed for that particular condition of ours, which the health has suffered, the body has suffered, and we have gone into therapies and surgeries and whatnot, everything. And once we've come out of it, I'm sure the medical fraternity by then, as Kiran again pointed this out earlier, in November and December, none of us knew what we were talking today. I think today the world is more aware of how this whole thing is transpiring itself. And maybe we are looking at multiple ways of addressing the solution. Earlier, we thought it was just the ventilators that the whole world needed, and we were shipping it from Seattle to New York or from Delhi to Madras or whatever. But now we all know that we are slowly coming out of that kind of limited initial information, and we are looking at a very, very broad-based approach for treatment therapies. Having said that, once you come out of this, there are going to be certain sacrifices that I think everyone would have to make. Nobody would want to go back and relapse into something like this, which is so dreadful, which again, we have data coming out of China, we have data coming out of Korea, which is talking about some of the patients who have tested negative maybe 3 months prior and now are being found being testing positive. So we don't know again what kind of an environmental factors are propelling this kind of changes in a person's condition. So it is again very we cannot generalize it. I don't think crocin can be maybe generalized for a headache or something else, but these kinds of infections and situations are not something that will be cannot be generalized. And I think we will take precautions. A person, if he's a smoker, may have to give up smoking for a while. We don't know, because again, it's a very personalized case-by-case medical history that he or she is going to have to sit with their doctor and decide as to what would be the safest route for them to step ahead for the next 6 months or 12 months down the line. And I think even kidney dialysis patients go through stringent issues of being following that they follow. Even post-transplants, I know that I had a family member, my own brother-in-law, was a kidney transplant patient way back. But I know the kind of immunosuppression, the drugs that had to be given, the safety, the issues of contamination. Nobody with a cold or a cough would even go near him, or a fever would go near him. So there's going to be any such devastating disease burden on the population or an individual is going to will come with certain limitations or restrictions. So I think it is up to the individuals, in the best interest of the individual, and again sitting and discussing that with their medical practitioner or their whatever the group, the medical advice that they get, that they would have to take all those precautions going forward. That's the only way.
One size fits all, that's what you're saying.
I don't think I can say that, because I don't think anybody can say that either. Again, we just have to take it one at a time, and it's one day at a time for me. That's how I'm looking at it too. So it's very difficult at this point of time to be predicting so much that is going on, and sometimes it's like, too much bombardment of information from all over across the world. Of course, we are concerned. We're all concerned. But at the same time, I think we just need to focus on the issues that we have as states and as a country, as a nation. And we know what our strengths and weaknesses are. And I think we need to go with what works for us the best. And that's the way forward for us. And rather than copying or saying that somebody did this and they got better, and maybe I should do that and I might get better.
Okay.
We don't know. It may work, it may not. Yeah.
I want to take off from what you said and bring in Mahima in that, a lot of people are saying that Indians, touch wood, our death rate is lower than the other countries. They're saying that it's something in our immune system that is working for us. Is it the BCG vaccine? Is it the heat? What is working for India? Do you believe that at least in India, our rate is a little lower, the death rate is a little lower, so we have something to be hopeful about? Mahima.
I'd really like to believe so, that there was some secret sauce in our genetic code that was providing some kind of shield. But I would say the evidence needs to present itself. There's ongoing studies with the BCG vaccine. So we just have to wait to see if the BCG vaccine actually has an impact on immunogenicity. I think a huge part of it was that India took very drastic measures pretty early on, and they were reasonably good about contact tracing for anyone that came in. So I would say if there was a single thing that played a part in the cases being where they are today, and the fact that, we're only doubling every 13 days, is probably that intervened more. I'd like to believe that, genetically we have some kind of shield, but we have no evidence to tell us that yet.
Okay. Before we move on to the biotech sector as a whole, Kiran, I just want to ask you one more question. You're tied up with the Serum Institute. So, we're hearing that they are predicting that a vaccine may be out as soon as September. Can you tell us a bit more on that?
I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of Adar. I'm sure he won't like it. But what I can tell you, and this is public information, the University of Oxford, of course, moved pretty aggressively into a phase 3 study, and they're testing this vaccine across, I believe, 6,000 people, which is really great to be able to scale that quickly. It remains to be seen how the UK government will view this, if they will wait for, getting persistence, what Kiran talked about, even if there's immunogenicity, how long does it last? It certainly is not sufficient time to prove safety. Safety studies, typically take much longer. And of course, with a situation like COVID, there's always risk benefit. So let's assume a vaccine is proven in a lab that it's successful by September, for argument's sake. It's really important to understand that vaccines don't get made overnight. In fact, I keep using this analogy that vaccines are like making a baby is like making a vaccine. The process is the same everywhere in the world, and there really are no shortcuts, and it does take 9 months, give or take, right? Depending on the technology. So even assume a vaccine is successful, it's really important to understand that you need to invest in scaling the vaccine, and going from something that's successful in a lab to making 100 million doses of that stuff is not trivial. And I really hope, and if there are companies that are well placed to do that, they are companies such as Serum, because we've all had experience in large scale manufacturing. So if there is a company that can do that, it would be companies such as Serum. But September is fairly ambitious. A lot depends on the UK government's perspective on this.
Dr. Shaw, could you tell us a bit more about what the Serum Institute is up to?
Well, I think Mahima has basically said what they're doing. I think Serum Institute is collaborating with the Oxford Vaccine Group. Basically, they have offered to produce the product for them. And I think that is very important, because technology transfer and scale up is extremely important. It takes time. So Serum is doing that, which is very good, because it saves a lot of time for somebody like the Oxford Vaccine Group to do that. Secondly, they're also going to be a part of the global trial. So I hope some of the Indian population will also be part of that trial. So I think it's a very exciting program. And as Mahima says, let's see how long it takes to get approval, or even expedited approval for such a vaccine. And as I mentioned earlier on, if that expedited approval comes for emergency use, at least some part of the population in India will be able to get served. But I think what we really need to also look forward to is many, many vaccines coming out because of COVID-19, because you will need a huge production of vaccines. And I'm looking forward to Mahima and Suchitra also producing vaccines for COVID-19 so that we all benefit. I think that's the way we have to look at it. I don't think one company ought to be only producing vaccines for the world. I think we need many, many vaccine companies to be producing effective vaccines. And only time will tell which really of these vaccines is superior to the others. Right now, it's too short a time to make an assessment.
Fair enough. Now, a little bit about the biotech sector. I quoted you in the beginning saying that it's now time, good that people are focusing on infectious diseases and not just non-infectious. But the sector as a whole, are you happy with what the PM has promised? Are you looking for more help, especially for startups in the biotech sector? Kiran, Dr. Shah?
So this is the first time there is so much spotlight thrown on the biotech sector. Up until now, the biotech sector was always an ignored sector. It was a struggling sector, except for a few companies, the vaccine sector being one of them, and say the biopharmaceutical sector that I am in was one of them. Apart from us, I think I've seen a huge number of very innovative biotech startups struggling to survive. Today, for the first time, I think thanks to the Department of Biotechnology and what they have called BIRAC, which is really the Industry Research Acceleration Council, that's thanks to their efforts, they're actually investing in these very interesting, innovative startups. I've also seen some startups who are struggling to make products like, antibiotics for drug-resistant bacteria, not being able to get any funding. Okay, they've been struggling and struggling and struggling for funding. And after COVID, I was delighted to see that they were able to raise some money from private VCs. Okay, so I think today the VCs do have to understand that it's not always about IT. It's not just about having very smart apps and having all these very cool technologies. That is what they were actually investing in. They ignored the biotech sector, and this is a life-saving sector as we are seeing today. So I think we need to get real. We need to get very, real about what is it that we need to really invest in. We need to invest in all sectors. I'm not saying that you have to invest only in this sector, but don't ignore a sector like this, which is so important for healthcare, so important for various aspects of agriculture, sustainability, healthcare, energy. There are so many applications of biotech. This is the broadest technology base that you ever can find. And it even encompasses IT. So I'm just saying that, this is a time when all technologies need to converge. Biotech is certainly a very, very important technology, because this is the technology that develops tests or diagnostics. This is a technology that develops biomedical innovation, including the ventilators and many, many other scans and things like that. This is an area that develops therapeutics and therapies. One of the other therapies I forgot to mention was the plasma therapy for convalescent patients. Now, that is also something that is being tried in serious patients. And, the chances are that if you give it at the right time, you can save patients with this therapy, because it works like a therapeutic vaccine. So instead of giving the vaccine and getting the response for developing those antibodies, you're actually taking antibodies that have already been developed by convalescent patients, and you're trying to give it to patients so that those antibodies can help those patients recover. So there's lots of very exciting technologies that are being developed by biotechnology: therapies, therapeutics, vaccines, tests, diagnostic tests, and biomedical equipment. So there's so much to be done that if you don't invest in these kind of areas, you will actually be at a huge risk. And right now we were at a huge risk until the Indian companies really rose to the challenge and came out with all these solutions. So I think one of the things I also want to say is, look, the finance minister is going to be announcing some stimulus package. I hope there's a stimulus package for biotech, because this is a sector that needs to invest a lot in R&D. And it was a sad tragedy that the government decided to do away with, the weighted tax deduction on R&D. I hope they bring it back. It just ended on the 31st of March, even though we were shouting and screaming, saying, please don't do this, but they did it. Now I hope they realize the mistake they've made, and I hope they bring back that particular incentive for R&D, because without R&D and innovation, we cannot find these solutions. Secondly, I think there's a huge opportunity for India to build self-reliance and exports, because when you start building scale for our own needs, that becomes a very competitive export opportunity. So I'm hoping that they also bring in export incentives like they did under SEZ. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for the biotech sector, and I hope for the first time the government does not ignore this sector and take us for granted.
That's a very passionate and firm plea. Not a plea, actually, it's more like a statement coming, an assertion from Dr. Shaw. Suchitra, would you like to add to that?
I'm muted.
Suchitra, you're mute.
Yeah, I think we've lost your volume. So until
No, you are mute.
That is.
I think until the
She
mic
has
comes
muted
on.
herself. She needs to unmute.
Yeah. I think Kamini, you can send her a message. Meanwhile, I'll ask Mahima to take that question if you would, if you want to add something to what needs to be done for your sector.
What happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in industry, in industry, typically you have two types of mechanisms that governments deploy. You have push mechanisms and then you have pull mechanisms. Push mechanisms are things like investing in R&D, VCs giving funding, or BIRAC, or the government giving funding. In the US, you would see funding going through academia, and that's how research flows. Pull funding is where you create market-based incentives, where you say, you know what, you go ahead and make the investments necessary to discover a product, and then the government will they will buy the product. So there's two types of mechanisms, push and pull. And historically, our push mechanisms have been extremely fragmented because the funding availability for basic research in India is pretty meager. Even that is spread across multiple functionalities, so it's been sort of fragmented. I think with this situation in COVID, there's a lot of thinking about bringing that funding together in a cohesive manner to make it more meaningful, to make it go the distance, and to actually invest in product development. On the pull side, COVID is again a different situation. I mean, more than a market imperative, there's a moral imperative here. But again, in traditional sense, you would have a market incentive where, if it's a disease, a lot of infectious diseases don't have appropriate market incentives, right? Because they're niche diseases. There's the countries that get affected don't have enough resources to pay for them. They haven't created the fiscal space because they have so many other healthcare priorities. So it's really important that the government thinks about a safety net. Universal immunization has been extremely powerful tool in our country. Luckily, the confidence in immunization is great, but it's really important to expand that and either create market incentives or push mechanisms. And when government is resource stretched and they can't do either of them, then they really ought to be looking at indirect incentives, a lot of which Kiran talked about already.
Have you been able to fix your mic? Would you like
Yes, Priya. That was actually, I think the host had something, maybe they have a control on my mic rather than I having done something about it. No, my hands are off, you can see. Anyway, going back to what I think you were, could you just repeat the question again, or is it the same thing that you were asking, Mahima?
So we are still on the same topic as to what incentives can be offered to the biotech sector as a whole, especially given the current crisis. What do you expect the government to do? Do you think there can be some more push from the government needed, and what can the government really do for you?
Absolutely, but that again just cannot come overnight or for just a particular situation that is now, kind of like choking us. And biological solutions just don't happen overnight. I mean, we don't have molds, we don't have presses, and these things happen over years and years and years of so much of scientific knowledge, academic knowledge. A lot of research goes on in laboratories and universities and institutions, research institutions across the world, I mean, and in India too. But I don't think short-term solutions are going to really help us, because as Kiran said, all of us have notched our, pulled our belts, tightened our belts already in terms of seeing how best we could turn around. Like, I don't have a production facility specifically that can be created in 3 months for a COVID vaccine, to be honest with you, because no biological facility in the world can be made, can be created or put together. It's all brick and mortar first, and then there's a whole bunch of instruments and equipments and all kinds of things. I mean, there's air systems, HVAC systems, and whatnot. I mean, we are creating something that is not the common room that you and I are sitting in here today. We're working in extraordinary conditions, especially in vaccine manufacturing. Mahima knows that very well. We are both neighbors here in Genome Valley as well. And these things don't happen overnight. Systems, infrastructure like this takes 24 to 36 months or even beyond worldwide. And short-term measures can only help us augment the quick steps that we could take in order to bring forth the best of the remedies that we could. Currently, as I speak, we have converted an existing facility which we had created, which was BSL-3. I think Kiran is aware of this because Krishna and Kiran were talking the other day. And we had an existing facility in-house which had to be converted and re-equipped and remodified in order to take up the work for the ICMR NIV strain that we are working on right now, because it's working in negative pressure. And the employees, the entire system of support, everybody needs to be geared up for this. There's no fast turnaround. It's a very highly capex-driven industry sector. Whether it's R&D or whether it's equipment, whether it's facilities creation, whether it's clinical development, and of course, marketing and distribution, because most of our vaccines, Mahima and I do this every day, it goes in cold chain. It's -20. The polio vaccine that we deliver across the world is -20. And the rest, many other, the rotavirus is a -20 vaccine. And there are many other vaccines which are 2 to 8. So even the cold storages that have to be created in our own facilities, the trucks are cold storage. The trucks get onto, the containers get then onto the air cargo, and then they go across the world or into other parts of the country. So everything, including the distribution and marketing, to the end point. I mean, when we supply to the government and international agencies, our final delivery destination, until that point, the vaccine manufacturer is responsible for the absolute quality of that vaccine, the lots, the entire batch getting landing in that particular country or that point. So it is an extensively financially intensive sector that we are in, unfortunately, and there's no shortcuts, not that any of us want it, but at the same time, the government needs to understand that this needs to be done for the nation, and this is not for a company or a particular individual or an institution. But I think this goes to show that as a country, if we can have this kind of national stockpile in terms of vaccines and therapies, in order, today it is COVID, tomorrow, next year, we don't know what it's going to be. Like when H1N1, there's an example, I can go back 7-8 years ago, close to that, when the pandemic, when we had a swine flu pandemic, we were again at a loss as a country. we didn't know where to go, and we didn't know how we could come about with a vaccine until we could get help from the United States. And that's when the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, could then help, send out the strains to the government of India, which in turn then had those strains given to 3 of us as vaccine manufacturers, who could then turn around in a 8, 9, or 10-month time frame, and we could roll out the vaccine for H1N1 as well. So these are national emergencies. These are not to be looked upon as state or regional or something which persists in a particular community or a part of the country. I think this is a national emergency, and this is also an international emergency now. So it goes to show that there is so much that is required. The government needs to step up, not just this one time, but I strongly believe that they need to look at it in the long run for the next 25, 30, 40, 50 years.
Holistic lesson for the health sector. Yeah, they totally
I need to leave, but I just wanted to say that I couldn't agree with Suchitra more. I think this is a very asset-heavy industry. There's a lot of investment needs. I think there's a lot of gestational investment needs, because it takes 3 to 4 years before you can commercialize anything. Right. And that's why people only see a vial or a cartridge or a pill or a syringe, but they don't realize what is behind all of that. And it is a very, very expensive process. So when people keep clamoring for, please lower your costs and give us, why are you charging so much? I don't think they realize how expensive it is to develop all these products. So I just want the ladies to know that these are very, very expensive operations. They have to be done in a very sterile way. So that adds to the cost. And now with all this COVID, believe me, every one of us is having to even add more cost, because every one of our employees is wearing protective apparel. Everyone is wearing a mask. We are seeing that in all of, we are sanitizing vehicles, we are sanitizing every part of our facility. So I want everyone to know that it's not easy to run such operations. So I just want to sign off by saying, here's keeping our fingers crossed. I hope Suchitra and Mahima come out with those vaccines. And on my side, I promise you, we are going to work very hard on the tests and the therapies.
And I'm going to give the floor to Janvi. Kiran, if you can stay on, they're just 2 or 3 questions, no more than 2 or 3. So if you can,
pardon?
If you can stay on for 5 more minutes, they're just.
I can't. I have another meeting. I have to go for that meeting. So if you don't mind.
Kiran, I'd just like to thank you on behalf of Vicky Flo. Absolutely fascinating what you're telling us. We won't try to hold you up, but I would have more questions for the other ladies. But really, this is an eye opener. And for us who've strayed away from, the world of science, it's so important that you've explained to us in basic terms. And we look forward to more such interaction with you.
Thank you. Thank you. And all the best, and congratulations on being elected.
Thank you, Kiran. And my question to you all would be, to all the 3 ladies, what will the one thing you'd be needing from the government for this, the one policy change that the government must bring into the biotechnology field?
Just one, sure. I have a pretty long
list.
Yeah,
you have a long list.
No, I think in the context, let me speak in the context of vaccines, if there's one change, because on the regulatory side, I think they're doing everything they can to fast track approvals, look at expedited reviews and things like that. The one thing the government hasn't made clear, and I'll go back to what Mrs. Yella was saying about the H1N1 experience. When H1N1 happened, the world was panicked, WHO reached out, manufacturers decided to make investments. The government said, we'll stockpile, first responders will get it, and every year India will invest in a stockpile. 2 years later, H1N1, sort of died down. It wasn't such a big concern anymore. And the government reneged on its deals to buy stockpiles. So here were these companies that said, all we needed was assurance from you, and that assurance was taken away. But the companies already made the investments in infrastructure, in everything. One of the biggest things, and of course, COVID is a crisis of, different proportions. So one would assume that's not the case. But with pandemics, you never know the turn that they're going to take. And here it is, you're expecting manufacturers to make at-risk investments without having any visibility to, the strategy on immunization, on future stockpiling. So if there's one policy change that the government ought to make, and by the way, this is practiced in countries like the United States. They have an organization called BARDA specifically for this that ensures capacity building and that they ensure that there's sufficient vaccine always available, because you can never predict a pandemic. That's why it's called a pandemic. So if the government needs to make one important intervention, it's to invest in at-risk manufacturing and make sure that there's no downside for the people who choose to do it.
That's interesting.
From my side, pretty much Mahima and I would probably cover similar points, but it's again the same thing. And for the government or for the public at large to understand that this is an extremely risky kind of a scenario that we are in, very unpredictable. Again, being a pandemic, because this is not a routine infection that we would have like a malaria or a rotavirus or a chikungunya or a, something else that we would know how to extrapolate the data that is out there internationally and then roll out our investment capabilities or, resources into it. But this all happening, all of a sudden, all over the world, of course. We also are sometimes at a loss of, as to how do we look at it. I mean, we don't know, again, what happens after 2 years. The strain may change. After the 2-year process of developing a vaccine, we may be looking at data from somewhere, from Hopkins or from somewhere else, any other, reputed academic institution around the world saying that, hey, look, no, this is not happening and this is how the game has shifted. So we also need to be very cognizant of that. The government, I'm sure, understands this. We have the Department of Biotechnology under the Ministry of Science and Technology that is specifically constituted, which deals with the entire sector as such. And I'm sure they could do for this time around. I think we will just need to run, and we can't afford to walk. And it's not a slow morning walk. We need to run or maybe even sprint. So I think they know it, and I think they're all, the government, I'm surprised this time around, Mahima too would be aware of this. They've started calling us. It used to be the other way around, Mahima, for us. We would be running behind every sheet of paper would be filed, and we have people stationed in Delhi all the time to be, going behind the officer or the desk. But this time around, we have started getting calls from Delhi, and it's like, are you guys working today? And we are like, oh yeah, we're still here in our facilities, and we're trying to get this going and that going and things like that. But I think they have understood, they know it. They know it's very serious. And I think as a country, we can do it too. We have shown it in the pharma sector. We have had many cost-effective solutions. For all of you ladies, if I can just sum it up in one line, 70% of the vaccines made for India comes from Hyderabad. And Mahima is there to second it, of course. And 40 to 50% of the world's vaccines go from India to the world vaccines. So let's not forget that as a country, as companies, we can come and stand and deliver. If we just can get that little bit of a broad push and support and just that strengthening of the mechanism that is around us, and a little bit of hand-holding or taking care of the long-term issues that as a sector that we would have to be dealing with, I think we're ready to play the game. I mean, we're ready. We will supply for India, we'll supply for the rest of the world as well, which we are already doing as well. I mean, we're not, this is not the first time. All of us are in it together, and we'll be able to deliver it.
Great to know that. Thank you. That was very interesting, Suchitra. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If I may, Priya, we have a lot of past presidents in the forum today. I would like to call in our past president, Neeta Buchra from Jaipur. Please put the spotlight on Neeta. Yes.
Do you have a question?
Unmute me.
You're fine.
I think now I'm fine. Unprecedented times, new challenges, new opportunities. Namaskar to everyone from the Pink City, Jaipur. I would like to begin by congratulating Janvi Phukan, President-elect, the first one from Northeast, for organizing such a relevant session in the present times. And I would like to also congratulate the Wonder Woman leading this COVID cure, and as I may rightly say, this life-giving sector, as Kiranji just said. My question to you is, we need to save lives, but at the same time, we need to save livelihoods. So what do you both suggest we as a pan-India organization can do in this crisis? What role of a catalyst that we can play?
If I will just tell you my example, thank you for that question. It is absolutely lives and livelihood. I mean, the word itself is entwined together. I mean, there's no hood and there's no, I mean, there's no life, then there's no livelihoods, right? So life and livelihoods go hand in hand. It's like the right and, you know. My take on that would be is as sectorally, as we come under the pharma and the life sciences sector, we have not, we come under the essential services. And so we have not shut down. Realistically, Mahima knows this, and I'm here at my office today, and our plants are working 24/7. Our employees have been coming in. I think 4th of March was when the Prime Minister called for the national lockdown, and there has not been a day that our premises has been shut down. We have just ensured that we practice all the precautionary measures that need to be taken in terms of being, following safety, which is the first and foremost priority for our employees. And also then after coming here, also ensuring that they have all the backup reinforcements to that. So we have not shut down technically, from the chairman of the company to the office boy or the pantry boy, they're all functioning here. And that too, mind you, my own office is also working in shift A and shift B, wow, which was never the case before. We would all come probably in a general shift and go back, meaning the director's office. But today we have tried and seen how best to keep social distancing within our organization. So if we have 2,000-3,000 employees, we have just cut it short to less than 30% at one point in time in the campus. So that all such interventions are important that we take at our workplaces. Internally, inside our manufacturing facilities, these precautions are followed every day, every shift, every time a production employee, department employee walks into his chambers. These are all guidelines that we follow day in and day out. But some of them have now been extrapolated to the entire campus and also to the transportation and things like that. We have made the women employees, we have told them we requested them or offered to them, especially because I'm saying this point, we have offered them all to come in the first shift so that they don't have to be away from their homes during the second shift or reach home close to about 11 o'clock in the night or so. And mind you, all of us, Mahima and I, our plants are not in the center of the city or maybe within the parameters of the city. We are about a good 40-50 kilometers outside the city of Hyderabad. where Genome Valley is located, and Mahima's campus and my campus, both, we're neighbors here. So we know the logistics and the issues that we take care on a day-to-day basis. But this time around also, it is a little tough on us, but we've just gone about to ensure that all our women employees have been given the first option to come to choose the shift that they would like to come. There are women who have also said they'll come in the second shift. So that's their choice. But we have tried to see how best we could engage them and bring them over. My suggestion to all of you in other sectors is to, if the government says the lockdown is going to be eased out in whatever manner that they choose to do so, of course, we have to abide by the law of the land. There's no question about that. But I would suggest that please start keeping all the precautions in mind, and also ensure that as employers, now that our responsibility is not just for our families, but it's widened out that much more, that every employee and their families are as important to us as our own families. So I think we just have to be that little, take that extra precaution, and then please go ahead and restart your businesses again after it is officially okay to do so.
We shall do our bit. We all shall do our bit.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call on Kiran Gera, our past president from Mumbai, if Kiran's here. Kiran
I'm
Gera.
there.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Well, I know Suchitra Ella personally. So Suchi, hi. Wonderful.
Hi,
See you in a different avatar this time. I have a little something to say which is not really related to the chamber, but on a personal level, I feel that I'm absolutely overwhelmed by this fabulous interaction where we have learned so much. And it's been such a huge reality check for us. For me, I'm talking about, because we are waiting for this magic wand to move and the vaccines to come. And the reality check is that, no, it's not going to happen in a hurry. It's not, there's no magic wand in it. It could take time. And therefore, we have to recalibrate how we want to lead our lives for the next 1 year or maybe 2 years. Given that, I'm, as a citizen of India, hugely concerned about two things. One, that we really don't have the medical facilities and the health infrastructure. So that even if some of the things that are happening in the world in terms of developments in treatment, like Kiran Majumdar-Shaw said about, not looking at ventilators, but sorting out the blood clotting in the lungs. It's not going to happen in a hurry in our country. And for most of us, we may not be able to even have access to a bed in the hospital. In such a situation, even though you are very, you are biomedical people, you're talking about vaccines, do you think we should also start exploring alternative therapies like homeopathy and Ayurveda, because many of them are not intrusive? Please answer.
Mahima, why don't you take that first?
Okay, I'll be happy to. I'll be happy to. I think, again, there's a lot of times where Ayurveda has helped and things like that, but with most of these interventions, unfortunately, we don't have too much scientific evidence to say that this is a standard of care. So it would be really challenging. I remember when I flew back in, I think it was my last trip, I came back in February into the country, and I saw these big posters by Ayush in the airport, and it infuriated me because, again, it's not to say that wouldn't work, but there was no evidence behind such a thing. And to give such a sweeping recommendation is frankly dangerous, because, you give a false sense of security when one should really be taking much more care about social distancing, washing hands. All of those would probably play a bigger role than giving individuals a false sense of hope. So, I'm not against any of these alternative therapies, but I think they should be evidence-based. What is important, and it's not an alternative therapy, it's a lifestyle, staying healthy, getting some exercise, moderate exercise, sleeping well. We know that all of these things contribute to our immunology status, to our immune status, and they help boost our immunity. I can tell you a very fascinating thing, at least I found it fascinating. Every single batch of vaccine we make gets tested on animals for them to get released. So when we get these animals and we do tests on them, they're obviously in a state of stress because they're caged, right? There has been controlled experiments where you take an animal and you keep it without stress, you play music, you let it acclimatize to its new cages. Their immune responses are better than an individual under stress. So these are, minor things. We take them for granted, but I think taking care of ourselves, making sure we stay healthy, not just physically, but mentally is very important at a time like this. And again, making sure that we understand that we all have to kind of revisit our idea of normal, our idea of staying home is the new normal. It's not going out. So it's things like that. It may seem intrusive, but in my mind, there are small sacrifices to be paying for the luxury of staying alive and staying healthy, and more importantly, not making other people succumb to this, because of our responsibility. So that's my take on it.
Hi, Kiran. This is wonderful catching up with you this afternoon. I would agree with Mahima 100% on exactly what she's probably read my mind as well. She's a good mind reader. Exactly the same thing. I have nothing against any of the alternative therapies we have in a country like ours, which has a very long lineage of alternative therapies having existed much before we have had access to allopathic interventions. But again, the problem comes is when, how do you prescribe it generally for everybody? It's not some vitamin or it's not a vitamin D or something like that. I mean, it's not a pill for some such, it's not a supplement. So in order to prove that that particular science is going to deliver the result 100%, because again, we are talking human life, and nobody wants to take any chances. So unless it is scientifically proven, which can be again done by even those areas of science, whether it's homeopathy or whether it's naturopathy or Ayurveda or Unani, I'm sure, but they would have to prove it over a population of, of testing it and compiling the data and then making it available for the authorities or the Ministry of Health or the government to then consider, based on the facts of safety and efficacy, that these other alternative therapies could also be administered. Because the call ultimately has to be made by the government. In situations like this, personally, you and I can make a decision for our own self, but for the public at large, I think it's the national regulatory authorities and the governments and institutions like the WHO that would have to make these recommendations, because we cannot give false hopes. I totally agree with what Mahima said. Thank you.
That is fascinating. Fascinating. Thank you so much. There's so much of learning. But now I have not a past president, but a vice president of Wikiflow, Jayanti Dalmia, who would like to ask the next question. Jayanti, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, Suchitra and Mahima. It's been really, really a fantastic, informative discussion to know what's happening in the vaccine world, actually. And also heartening to know that India will be able to do 200,000 tests in a day. I was just wondering that besides the vaccine, would antibody treatment also work as a precaution?
Yes, absolutely. Well, not as a precaution. You wouldn't. Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say antibody therapies shouldn't be used as a precaution. They must really be considered as an intervention during a treatment. And there's two kinds of antibody therapies that are being contemplated. You know, we talked about the plasma therapy where you're taking blood out of recovered patients. So that's really one form of antibody therapy. There's other companies, including ourselves, that are working on growing these antibodies in other systems. Like, for example, for snake bites, we raise antibodies and anti-snake venom in horses. We do that for diphtheria as well, so that you have a large animal, and you can imagine it's very hard to find people who have recovered from a snake bite and then use their plasma to arrive at a therapy, and these are often extremely expensive. So people are working, in addition to taking human plasma, they're working on raising equine-based plasma. But these are extreme therapeutics, so they cannot usually, they have their own side effects, but when you're on a deathbed, those won't seem so severe. So certainly not for prevention, but for therapeutic intervention, I think they have a great role to play.
That means totally like a person like me, we cannot take it. Take the treatment.
Not at all.
Required. If you're not, if you're asymptomatic or
No,
absolutely.
It like vaccines are, like I said, very early on. Vaccines are something that are given to healthy children, healthy babies, and healthy adults, right? You and I can take a vaccine for typhoid, or you and I can take a vaccine for something else. But when it comes to the plasma therapy or the monoclonal antibodies that Mahima just spoke about, it is something that it is not a preventive care, but it is a curative. It's a prophylactic. So it can't be generalized and just taken as a precaution, because there are rumors going around. Could you take hydrochloroquine as a, or the malarial or the antivirals to prevent corona coming and hitting us at some point of time? There was many questions out there, but I said, no, I don't think we need to get into that kind of self-medication, because we don't know what kind of other side effects and other issues that may come out if we were to do such things. So we just have to go very, very, with a very simple approach to this, is that just taking care of all these precautions, being cautious, extra cautious this time around, and trying not to do the things that the agencies and the governments and others are telling us not to do. And by not getting into too many things of areas of interventions without having too much of good scientific data, knowledge, information, and approved by, again, the medical fraternity has to be also convinced. It's not about just that some drug is out there and I can take it and I make it and I can take it. No, it's not so. Because ultimately your doctor or my doctor is going to have to prescribe some such intervention, which is of a very serious or a high order of therapy. So we just cannot self-administer these things. So I think it's very important. Having said that, Bharat, which is our, our organization is also has started working on the monoclonal antibodies. This project is led by us with collaboration with the IIT of, I think it is IIT Kanpur or Kharagpur, one of the IITs, and also the National Center for Cell Science in Pune. So again, these are all things which will come out over a period of time, but it will be a curative kind of a therapy and not a preventive.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. One more question, ladies. We really want to go, but please take this question from our past president, Vinita Bimbet of Mumbai. Vinita, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. This is probably, firstly, wonderful. It's been a wonderful session. Thank you so much for giving us your time. a question, you may find it very silly. I believe COVID has mutated several times, I don't know, 15 times, 20 times. And now it's mutated and it has also spread to very young children, 10 years old and 12 years old. So the cure that everybody is chasing, will it work on the original COVID and will it work on the mutations as well? Or are you targeting several different kinds of vaccines targeted at different mutations?
Well, that's the holy grail kind of question. You know, I wish we knew. I wish we knew. But from what we do know so far, I can tell you that even if the virus has mutated, the conserved sequences of the virus still remain the same. So in some sense, so one approach that we're working on is on preventing the virus from binding to the ACE2 receptors. So in simplistic terms, there's a lock and there's a key. And in our bodies, there's a lock that's usually shut. But in the case of the virus, it's figured out, you know, to be the key to that lock. So the protein approaches are sort of agnostic to the mutations because all they're trying to do is prevent the lock from the key from entering the lock. So there are certain approaches that will be agnostic to the mutations. So far, we don't believe the mutations have been severe enough for them to impact long-term immunogenicity, but time will tell. I mean, there's a reason that there's no universal influenza. It's because the strains change every year. They differ from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, and we just have not, you know, despite all of our scientific progress, have not been able to crack what it's going to take to have a universal influenza vaccine. I hope to God that's not the case for COVID, but let's assume in a worst case, that's the case for COVID. What you'll have to think about is then a new vaccine every year to keep up with the mutations.
Okay.
But the good news is that the world is used to doing that. Vaccine companies make influenza vaccines, which are technically a new vaccine, literally every year. And from the moment WHO releases the sequences and they say these are the strains, within 4 months, the vaccine is delivered. So if we need to do that, we'll do that. I hope that's not the case though.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's really very, very illuminating. And thank you for all the work you do. I wish there were more girls in STEM studies. I think that's Janvi's, that's going to be Janvi chasing that for us for Flow this year.
Yes. Thank you very much. Over to Priya now for the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, and I must congratulate Flow for putting this together. Especially, you know, the timing is also very important as we are coming out, or hopefully easing up, if not totally coming out of a lockdown. I think it's really imperative we understand the challenges we are up against. Not just, you know, this conversation helped us understand what COVID, you know, exactly what we are up against in terms of the disease, where we stand in terms of vaccines, in terms of, you know, just taking preventive measures like the contact tracing app that Kiran spoke about. Both Suchitra and I have been speaking about the vaccines they're developing. Coroflu is one. We've heard about the Oxford vaccine. We heard about cures that are in process. Remdesivir is there, maybe not a complete cure, but even if it shortens the span of, I think, infection and the disease, that's also a big step ahead. So, end of the day, these are the conversations we need. And most importantly, I think what I really like about this conversation is we see the front end, but you guys told us what happens behind the scenes. How difficult it is to, you know, not just develop but ensure the vaccine or medicine is also delivered, and the role India plays. You know, we play a huge role in manufacturing at the end of the day. So whoever develops the vaccine will need Indian help, Indian companies' help to actually produce it, not produce it at a good quality. That is exactly the point that we are placed, which is why I think a conversation like this was so important to have today. So thank you, ladies, and thank you, Hyderabad, for showing the way, as you pointed out to us also. And thank you, Janvi, for putting this together. For Namni, I haven't interacted with all of you, but the two of you that I have, thank you so much. And I think it's been an incredible conversation. Look forward to more such from Tricky Flow. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Priya, for taking the time off and speaking to our wonderful panel and to all of us. You know, there's been a learning, and I promise you there are going to be lots of these sessions, and we will want you back with us again and again. So may I give you the memento which we wanted to show? So in the virtual world, but I promise you it'll get someday. So IT, please, in Priya's name as well, the mementos. Sorry. Yep. Well, we'll overcome this too soon. This is almost there.
We're almost there. Yeah, we'll just give it some time. Yeah.
Okay, next IT.
That's Karen. Yeah, there's Priya.
Next. Mahima.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Suchitra. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Janvi. Thank you, Priya.
Absolutely.
Lovely seeing you, Mahima.
Same here. Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Janvi and Vicky Flo, for such a great opportunity. Be well and stay safe, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you, Flo. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We're not done yet.
Oh, okay.
Oops. Oops.
I should, yeah, IT, okay. So now, before we forget, I first need to thank Kamini Saraf of Hyderabad, who's got this incredible team together. Can't have done it without you. And I must mention here, Joshna Angara, also of Hyderabad, putting it together, and Bela Rajan of Mumbai. These were my core team, and not to forget Rashmi and the entire secretariat who's done this together. And may I ask my Senior Vice President, Ujjwala Singhania of Mumbai, to give us all the vote of thanks for this great team we have here together. Thank you. Ujjwala.
Good afternoon. What a good afternoon this has been. On behalf of Flo, a heartfelt thank you to Ms. Kiran Mazumdar. What an inspiration you have been to us. Thank you, Ms. Suchitra Ila and Ms. Mahima Dalta. We are grateful to you for being with us today and giving us the gift of your time. I would like to thank our past president and the members of audience. Thank you, Janvi Fupin, President-elect, for bringing this wonderful program to us. Scientists and researchers across the globe are racing against the time to develop a vaccine for the novel coronavirus. Till we find a solution, let us stay safe. Namaste. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wonderful, marvelous. Can't thank you all enough. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.